The fluorescent hum of my bathroom light buzzed in the quiet 3 o'clock a.m. air. I reached for my heart medication, the familiar orange bottle a comforting weight in my hand. Except it wasn't. It was far too light. Unscrewing the child-proof cap, I tipped the bottle, expecting the usual cascade of pills into my palm. Nothing. I shook it. A faint rattle. 2 pills. 2. Danny, I whispered, the name a knot in my throat. This wasn't just carelessness. This was life or death. I slumped against the cool tile wall, the 2 remaining pills clutched in my hand. My heart, already weakened, pounded a frantic rhythm against my ribs. He wouldn't, I murmured, trying to convince myself. But deep down, a chilling certainty took hold. Danny, my son, my sweet, troubled Danny, had stolen my medication. Again, he'd promised. He'd sworn he was clean. He'd looked me in the eyes, hand on his heart, and said, "Mom, I'm done." I swear, I closed my eyes, picturing him, the way he looked as a little boy, gap-toothed grin and bright eyes, full of mischief and love. Where had that boy gone? When had he become this ghost who haunted my life, stealing not just my pills but my peace, my hope, my future? What have I done? I whispered to the empty room. The cold tile against my back brought a sharp awareness of my own vulnerability. My chest tightened, a familiar premonition of the angina that gripped me when my medication wore thin. I needed those pills. I needed them now. Think, Alice, think, I muttered, pushing myself off the wall. I stumbled into the kitchen, flicking on the light. The harsh glare reflected off the empty coffee pot and the stack of unpaid bills on the counter. A wave of nausea rolled over me, not just the physical effects of the missing medication, but the sickening realization of my own complicity. I'd enabled him. Hadn't I given him money, made excuses, looked the other way, all in the name of love? But what kind of love allows its object to self-destruct? What kind of love puts its own life at risk? The thought hit me like a physical blow. My love had become a weapon, wielded against me by the very person I loved most. No more, I said aloud, the words shaky but firm. This wasn't love anymore. This was survival. I went to the living room, where the phone lay on the side table, its silent presence a stark reminder of the call I needed to make, a call I'd dreaded, a call I'd avoided for so long. My hand trembled as I reached for it, the cool plastic slick against my palm. I stared at the numbers, each one a tiny hurdle in a race I wasn't sure I could win. But I had to try. I had to fight. Not just for my own life, but for the sliver of hope, however faint, that Danny might finally understand. This has to stop, I said, my voice catching. It just has to. I took a deep breath and dialed 911. The ringing tone echoed in the stillness of the apartment, each pulse a hammer blow against the fragile dam holding back the flood of fear and uncertainty. 911, what's your emergency? A calm voice answered. I need help, I stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. My son, he's taken my medication. The operator's voice, professional and reassuring, guided me through the necessary information. My address, my condition, and your son's name, ma'am, she asked gently. The name caught in my throat, a bitter pill I couldn't swallow. Danny, I whispered, the sound barely audible. His name is Danny. As the sirens wailed in the distance, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It was a terrifying calm, the eye of the storm, a momentary reprieve before the inevitable onslaught. But within that stillness, a spark ignited, a spark of resolve, a spark of something that resembled hope. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something different, something better, something that wouldn't just save my life, but maybe, just maybe, his too. The thought, as fragile as a newborn butterfly, fluttered in my chest, a silent promise of a future I couldn't yet imagine, a future where maybe, just maybe, there would be more than 2 pills left in the bottle. The digital clock on my nightstand blinked 3:17 a.m., a cruel reminder of how little sleep I'd gotten. My chest ached, a dull, persistent throb that mirrored the emptiness in my gut. I'd known for a while that Danny's addiction was bad, but stealing my heart medication, that was a new low. How could he? I whispered to the empty room. My voice cracked. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I could actually die because of this. Not just from a heart attack, but from not having the medication I needed to prevent one. I fumbled for the water bottle on my nightstand, my hand shaking. I took a small sip, trying to ignore the tremor in my hand. My mind raced, trying to calculate how many pills I had left. Enough for maybe 2 days, 3 at the absolute most. Not nearly enough, I muttered, a wave of nausea washing over me. The prescription wasn't due for another week. Dr. Ramirez wouldn't refill it early. He'd warned me about that. Alice, these are serious medications. I can't just hand them out like candy, he'd said, his voice firm but kind. Kindness I no longer deserved. I had enabled Danny for far too long, blinded by a mother's love, always believing this time would be different. I swung my legs out of bed, the room swaying slightly. My head swam with dizziness. I needed to sit down, to breathe, to think, but the panic wouldn't let me. I stumbled to the dresser, pulling open the top drawer where I kept my emergency fund. A pathetic wad of bills stared back at me, mocking my desperation. This isn't even enough for a copay, I choked out, the tears finally coming. I'd drained my savings bailing Danny out of trouble time and time again. Lawyer fees, rehab stints that he'd walked out of, replacing items he'd pawned. The list went on and on. I'd always justified it, telling myself it was for his own good, that he'd eventually see the light. Now, sitting here in the pre-dawn darkness, the light was blinding. I'd been a fool, a naive, hopeful fool who had prioritized her son's addiction over her own survival. The harsh reality was that I couldn't afford another prescription, not without selling something. And even then, what would I sell? My worn-out furniture, my few pieces of jewelry, most of which were cheap trinkets anyway. It's not enough, I whispered, the despair threatening to swallow me whole. My gaze drifted to the framed photo on my nightstand. Eleanor and Julian beaming at their engagement party. Eleanor, my successful, independent daughter, the one who had managed to escape the shadow of Danny's addiction. She'd begged me to cut him off, to stop enabling him. Mom, you're killing yourself trying to save him. She'd pleaded just last month, her voice thick with worry. He needs to hit rock bottom before he can even begin to climb back up. I dismissed her words then, clinging to the hope that I could somehow fix him. Fix what I'd broken. Now, the weight of her words crushed me. She'd been right. I had been so focused on saving Danny that I'd forgotten to save myself. The irony was bitter. I'd always prided myself on being a good mother, on putting my children's needs before my own. But in doing so, I'd failed both of them. I'd failed Eleanor by letting Danny's addiction consume our family, and I'd failed Danny by enabling him, by shielding him from the consequences of his actions. I picked up the photo, my fingers tracing Eleanor's smiling face. She was due back from her European trip with Julian next week. They were going to announce the wedding date. A small flicker of warmth ignited within me. Eleanor deserved to be happy. She deserved a mother who was present, both physically and emotionally. A mother who wasn't constantly battling the demons of her son's addiction. I need to do something, I said aloud, the words surprisingly firm. This couldn't continue. I couldn't keep living like this. Not for myself, and certainly not for Eleanor. A new resolve hardened within me, a quiet strength I hadn't felt in years. The panic hadn't completely subsided, but it was no longer a raging torrent. It was a steady current, pushing me forward, pushing me toward a decision I knew I had to make, a decision that would change everything, a decision that, while terrifying, offered a glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. Maybe, just maybe, this was the rock bottom we both needed. The stale air in my living room felt heavy, suffocating. I watched Danny's retreating figure, the slam of the front door echoing the hollow ache in my chest. He'd just left, again. I can't believe you'd even ask. He'd snarled, his eyes darting around nervously. You know I need this, Mom. My plea for him to understand, to see how desperate my situation was, had fallen on deaf ears. He needed money, and I, as always, was expected to provide. But this time, I had nothing left to give, not even the pills that kept my heart beating. The room spun slightly, and I gripped the back of the worn sofa for support. The tightness in my chest returned, a familiar warning. I sank onto the cushions, the threadbare fabric offering little comfort. My gaze drifted to the empty pulled bottle on the coffee table, a stark reminder of my vulnerability. Eleanor had called earlier, her voice laced with concern. Mom, are you sure you're okay? You sound awful. I'd lied, told her it was just a cold. I couldn't burden her with this. Not now, with her wedding to Julian just weeks away. Don't worry, sweetheart, I'd said, forcing a cheerful tone. I'll be fine. But I wasn't fine. I was far from it. The harsh reality of my situation pressed down on me, the weight of years of enabling Danny's addiction crushing me. How had I let things get this bad? I'd always tried to protect him, to shield him from the consequences of his choices. I'd bailed him out of countless scrapes, emptied my savings account to cover his debts, even borrowed money from Eleanor, promising to pay her back soon. But soon never came, and now here I was, alone and scared, my own health hanging precariously in the balance. The faint buzz of my phone startled me. It was Eleanor again. Mom, Julian and I are worried. We're coming over. A wave of panic washed over me. I couldn't let them see me like this, weak and vulnerable. No, honey, really, it's fine, I insisted. I just need to rest. But Eleanor was persistent. "We're on our way," she said firmly. "Don't argue." I hung up, my hand trembling. I needed to do something, anything, to regain a semblance of control. I stumbled to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face, looking at my reflection in the mirror. I barely recognized myself. The worry lines etched deep round my eyes, the pale, drawn skin, the trembling lips. This wasn't me. I was always the strong one, the one who held everything together. But now I was falling apart. A sudden, sharp pain shot through my chest, doubling me over. I gasped for breath, clutching my chest. This was it. This was what it felt like to be truly alone, to face the consequences of my choices with no one to turn to. I had sacrificed everything for Danny, and what had it gotten me? A stolen prescription, and a heart that felt like it was about to explode. I reached for the phone again, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. I need help," I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. "I think I'm having a heart attack." The operator's calm, reassuring voice on the other end was a lifeline. "Stay calm, ma'am. What's your address?" I gave her my information, my words punctuated by gasps for air. "Help is on the way," she assured me. As I lay on the floor, waiting for the paramedics, my thoughts drifted to Eleanor. I pictured her radiant smile, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about Julian. I couldn't bear the thought of her seeing me like this, a broken, desperate shell of her mother. I had to get better. I had to find a way out of this mess, not just for myself, but for her. She deserved a mother who was strong, a mother who could be there for her on her wedding day, a mother who wasn't constantly consumed by her son's addiction. The sound of sirens in the distance offered a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the wake-up call I needed. Maybe this was the rock bottom that would finally force me to make a change. As the paramedics burst through the door, I clung to that sliver of hope, a small, flickering flame in the darkness that had enveloped my life. I had a feeling things were about to change, and not just with my health. Something told me this was the beginning of a new chapter, one where I finally put myself first. I just didn't know how yet. The digital clock on my nightstand blinked 3:17 a.m., a cruel reminder of how many sleepless hours I'd endured. My chest tightened, a familiar ache that radiated down my left arm. I fumbled for the pill bottle on my nightstand, desperate for the relief the small white tablet would bring. But the bottle was practically empty. 2 pills? Just 2. "No, this can't be happening again," I whispered, my voice raspy with fear. My son, Danny, had promised. He'd sworn he'd never touch my medication again after the last time. After the hospital, after I'd begged him, pleaded with him to understand that these weren't just pills, they were my lifeline, he'd said, "Mom, I get it. I'm sorry. I won't do it again." I clutched the bottle, the plastic cold against my clammy palm. 2 pills, not enough to get me through the day, let alone until I could get a refill. My prescription wasn't due for another week. I knew what that meant. Another trip to the emergency room. Another hefty bill I couldn't afford. More lectures from the doctors about the importance of taking my medication regularly. The shame burned in my throat. How many times had I been through this cycle, enabling Danny, bailing him out, covering for him, all while my own health deteriorated? "He needs help," I mumbled, the familiar justification echoing in the quiet room. He's sick. But a new thought, sharp and unwelcome, pierced through the fog of denial. What about me? What about my needs? I closed my eyes, picturing Danny's face, the way his eyes shifted nervously when he lied, the memory of him promising, hand over his heart, not to steal from me again flashed vividly. I believed him. I said aloud, my voice cracking. I always believe him. The truth was a bitter pill to swallow. My love for Danny, my desperate desire to help him, was killing me. I reached for my phone, the screen illuminating my face with an eerie glow. My hand trembled as I dialed 911. This is an emergency. The operator's voice crackled through the speaker. Please state your name and location. My voice shook as I gave the information, my words punctuated by shallow breaths. To need an ambulance. I'm having chest pains. The operator began asking questions, her voice calm and professional. Are you experiencing shortness of breath? Do you have any other symptoms? I answered as best I could, my mind racing. This time was different. This time, I knew I couldn't just sweep it under the rug. I had to face the reality of Danny's addiction, even if it meant facing the consequences. Ma'am, the paramedics are on their way, the operator said. Try to stay calm. But calm was the last thing I felt. Fear, yes. Regret, definitely. But also a strange flicker of something else. Resolve. I hung up the phone and stumbled to my feet, my legs unsteady. I walked to the window and looked out at the pre-dawn sky, a sliver of light beginning to paint the horizon. This time, I wouldn't make excuses for Danny. This time, I wouldn't lie to protect him. This time, I would tell the truth. The sirens grew louder, closer. I took a deep breath, the pain in my chest a constant reminder of the choice I had made, a choice to prioritize my own survival, a choice that might finally force Danny to confront his demons. As the paramedics burst through the door, their faces etched with concern, I knew I was taking a step into the unknown. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of a new chapter, not just for me, but for Danny too. A chapter where we both could finally begin to heal. The paramedics helped me onto the stretcher, their movements swift and practiced. It's going to be okay, Mum, one of them said, his voice kind. I clung to his words, a small raft of comfort in a turbulent sea of uncertainty. As they wheeled me out of my apartment, I looked back at the empty pulled bottle on my nightstand. It was a symbol of everything that had gone wrong, but also a reminder of the difficult, necessary truth I had finally faced. I closed my eyes, letting the sirens wash over me, carrying me away to a place where I hoped, desperately, to find not just physical healing, but also a way to break free from the cycle of enabling that had held both me and my son captive for far too long. The thought of Eleanor and Julian, their upcoming wedding, flitted through my mind. I needed to be there, healthy and strong. I owed it to myself, and maybe, just maybe, I could finally give Danny the tough love he needed to save his own life. The dial tone buzzed in my ear, each beep a hammer blow against the fragile quiet of my apartment. I clutched the receiver, my hands slick with sweat. 911. What's your emergency? A calm, professional voice inquired. The words caught in my throat. Reporting my own son felt like tearing myself apart. But I knew I couldn't keep enabling Danny's addiction. I need to report a theft. I stammered, the words tasting like ash. My medication. It's been stolen. The operator asked for my address and details about the stolen medication. It's for my heart, I explained, my voice trembling. I need it. It's life-saving. She reassured me that officers would be dispatched immediately and asked if I knew who had taken the medication. This was the hardest part. I believe it was my son, Danny, I admitted, each syllable a fresh wound. Silence hung heavy on the line, broken only by the operator's quiet intake of breaths. "Ma'am, are you in immediate danger?" she asked gently. "I don't know," I whispered, tears finally spilling down my cheeks. I need my medication." She told me to stay on the line, to unlock my door for the officers, and to remain calm. How could I be calm? My own son had stolen the medication that kept me alive. He'd chosen drugs over my life. The thought was a cold, hard knot in my chest. The minutes stretched into an eternity, each tick of the clock amplifying the fear gnawing at me. I paced the small confines of my apartment, my gaze drifting to the empty pill bottle on the counter. It was a stark reminder of my vulnerability, of the precarious thread my life hung by. The sirens finally wailed in the distance, a crescendo of sound that cut through the oppressive silence. Relief, sharp and piercing, warred with the guilt that twisted in my gut. 2 officers arrived, their faces etched with concern. I recounted the events, my voice still shaky, the shame burning in my throat. They listened patiently, their expressions hardening as I spoke. They assured me they would do everything they could to locate Danny and retrieve my medication. One officer stayed with me, while the other went to search the surrounding area. The waiting was agonizing, a slow burn of anxiety. The officer who remained with me, a kind-faced woman named Officer Miller, asked if I had any family or friends I could call. "My daughter, Eleanor," I said, "but she's out of town with her fiancé, Julian. They're on a pre-honeymoon cruise." A bitter laugh escaped my lips. They wouldn't want their trip interrupted by this mess. Officer Miller placed a comforting hand on my arm. "It's important to have someone with you, Mrs. Evans," she said gently. "Maybe you could try reaching them anyway." I hesitated. Eleanor had made it clear she didn't want to be involved in Danny's problems anymore. She distanced herself, built a wall between herself and the chaos that had become our family. "I don't want to bother them," I murmured, looking away. Officer Miller squeezed my arm. "Sometimes, even a quick phone call can make a world of difference," she said. I finally relented and called Eleanor. The phone rang and rang, each unanswered ring a small rejection. Finally, it went to voicemail. I left a brief, shaky message, explaining the situation and asking her to call me back. The emptiness in my apartment seemed to deepen after the call. I was alone, facing this terrifying reality alone. Hours crawled by. The other officer returned, empty-handed. He'd searched the area, questioned local pharmacies, but there was no sign of Danny or my medication. Despair began to creep into my heart, a cold, insidious tendril. Officer Miller stayed by my side, a silent, reassuring presence. She made calls, arranged for a temporary supply of my medication from a nearby hospital, and promised to continue the search for Danny. Her kindness was a small beacon of light in the overwhelming darkness. Just as I was starting to lose hope, my phone rang. It was Eleanor. "Mom, what's going on?" Her voice was laced with concern. I explained the situation. My voice choked with emotion. There was a long silence on the other end. "Mom, I'm so sorry," Eleanor said softly. "We'll be there as soon as we can. Julian is booking a flight back now. Just hang in there." Her words were a lifeline. Knowing Eleanor was coming, that she was willing to cut short her pre-honeymoon trip to be with me, filled me with a warmth I hadn't felt in a long time. It was a flicker of hope in the bleak landscape of my fear and despair. But even with that hope, a cold, hard truth remained. I had reported my son to the police. I had chosen my own survival, and in doing so, I had potentially shattered our already fractured family even further. The weight of that decision pressed down on me, a heavy burden I would have to carry, no matter what the future held. And as I waited for Eleanor and Julian, a new, unsettling thought began to form. What would happen to Danny when they finally found him? The stale air in my apartment felt thick with betrayal. Just hours ago, Eleanor and Julian had been here, telling me I was delusional, overreacting. "You're making a mountain out of a molehill, Alice," Eleanor had said, her voice tight. "Julian and I have a life to build. We can't be constantly bailing you out." Julian had just stood there nodding, his usual charming smile replaced by a thin, disapproving line. They'd left shortly after, leaving me alone with the crushing weight of their judgment and the terrifying flutter in my chest. My heart medication, gone. I knew Danny had taken it. He'd probably already sold it. The thought sent a fresh wave of dizziness through me. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking. 911. "What's your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice answered. I need an ambulance," I stammered, gripping the counter for support. "I think I'm having a heart attack." I gave them my address, my voice growing weaker. "Mom, stay on the line with me. Help is on the way." The dispatcher's voice was a lifeline, a small beacon of hope in the swirling darkness threatening to consume me. I sank to the floor, the linoleum cold against my cheek. Each breath felt like a monumental effort. The dispatcher continued to talk to me, asking questions about my symptoms, keeping me conscious. I vaguely registered the sound of sirens in the distance, growing louder with each passing moment. Then, a pounding on my door. "Paramedics, ma'am, can you hear me?" I managed a weak groan. The door swung open, and two EMTs rushed in, their faces etched with concern. "We're here, ma'am. Just stay calm." One of them knelt beside me, checking my pulse and blood pressure. "My medication, it's gone," I whispered, my voice barely audible. "Someone stole it." The other EMT gently helped me onto a stretcher. "Don't worry, ma'am. We'll take care of you." As they wheeled me out of my apartment, I glanced back at the empty space where my family photos sat on the mantelpiece. A single tear rolled down my cheek. This wasn't how I imagined my life would be. Not at all. In the ambulance, the EMTs continued to monitor my condition. "My son Danny," I managed to say between labored breaths. "He's the one who took it." The EMT looked at me with a mixture of sympathy and understanding. I'm sorry to hear that, ma'am. He didn't judge. He didn't accuse. He simply focused on stabilizing me. At the hospital, I was rushed into the emergency room. Doctors and nurses swarmed around me, their voices a blur of medical jargon. I felt a prick in my arm as they inserted N4. We're giving you something to help with the pain and stabilize your heart rhythm, a doctor explained. The medication began to take effect, and the crushing pain in my chest slowly subsided. I felt a wave of exhaustion wash over me. Lying in the hospital bed, hooked up to machines, I finally had a moment to think. This had to stop. The cycle of enabling Danny, the constant worry and fear, the near-death experiences, it all had to end. Reporting him to the police had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but it was also the most necessary. Maybe, just maybe, this would be the wake-up call he needed. A nurse came in to check on me. "How are you feeling?" she asked gently. "A little better," I replied, my voice still weak. "Thank you. You rest now," she said. "We'll take good care of you." As I drifted off to sleep, a strange sense of calm settled over me. For the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this was the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I prioritized my own well-being. A chapter where I finally stopped being a victim of my son's addiction. And maybe, just maybe, a chapter where my family could finally heal. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew I wasn't alone, and that in itself was enough to keep me fighting. Something told me I needed to get stronger, much stronger. The weak afternoon sun cast long shadows across my worn living room carpet. I jumped as a knock echoed through the quiet apartment. "Just a moment," I called, smoothing down my blouse, a nervous flutter in my stomach. I opened the door to a tall, serious-looking woman in a crisp detective's blazer. "Mrs. Peterson?" she asked, her voice firm but kind. "I'm Detective Martinez." I nodded, stepping aside to let her in. "Please, come in." My small living room felt even smaller with her presence. I gestured to the worn sofa. "Please, have a seat." Detective Martinez sat down, pulling a small notebook and pen from her pocket. She flipped it open, her gaze direct. "Mrs. Peterson, I understand you'd like to report a theft." My throat tightened. "Yes," I managed, my voice barely a whisper. "It was me medication. Heart medication." Detective Martinez's expression softened slightly. "Can you tell me exactly what happened?" she asked. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. I told her everything. How I'd discovered the empty pill bottle, the frantic search, the sickening realization of what must have happened. I told her about Danny, my son, and his struggles. It wasn't easy to admit, to lay bare the painful truth of my son's addiction to a stranger. But I knew it was necessary. He's been struggling for a long time. I confessed, my voice breaking. I've tried to help him, but I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Detective Martinez nodded understandingly. "I know this must be incredibly difficult for you, Mrs. Peterson," she said gently, "but it's important that you tell me everything you know." I swallowed hard, the lump in my throat making it difficult to speak. "He's stolen from me before," I admitted, shame burning in my chest. "Small things, money, but never anything like this." Never something that could kill me. The detective's pen scratched across the paper, documenting my every word. Do you have any idea where he might have gone? She asked. I shook my head, tears welling in my eyes. I don't know. I've tried calling him, but his phone goes straight to voicemail. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed amplified, each tick a painful reminder of the precious time I was losing without my medication. Mrs. Peterson, Detective Martinez said, her voice firm. I'm going to do everything I can to find your son and recover your medication. But I need your help. I nodded, clutching my hands together. Anything, I whispered. I'll do anything. She asked me a series of questions. Danny's age, his description, any known associates, places he frequented. I answered as best I could, my mind racing, trying to piece together any clues that might lead to him. Her mention needing to pay back a debt, I stammered, remembering a snippet of conversation I'd overheard a few days earlier. I didn't think much of it at the time, but Detective Martinez's eyes sharpened. A debt? Do you know to whom? I shook my head, frustrated by my own ignorance. No, to wish I did. The detective continued her questioning, meticulously noting every detail. As she spoke, a flicker of an idea began to form in my mind. A dangerous idea, perhaps, but one that held a sliver of hope. Hope that this nightmare might finally end. Hope that Danny might finally get the help he so desperately needed. Hope that I might finally be free from the constant worry and fear that had consumed my life for so long. Mrs. Peterson, Detective Martinez said, closing her notebook. Thank you for your cooperation. We'll be in touch as soon as we have any news. I nodded, a sense of weary resignation settling over me. Thank you, Detective, I said. As she turned to leave, I stopped her. Detective Martinez, I said, my voice stronger now, a newfound resolve hardening my gaze. There's something else you should know. I hesitated, the words catching in my throat. This was it, the moment of truth. My daughter, Eleanor, I began, my voice steady now, is getting married next month. A big, lavish affair. Julian, her fiancé, comes from a wealthy family. They'd spared no expense. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. Danny's always been jealous of Eleanor, of her life, her happiness. He might try to get money from her, from Julian. Detective Martinez listened intently. Her eyes narrowed. Interesting, she said. Very interesting. I'll make a note of that. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson. This information could be very helpful. She offered me a small, reassuring smile. We'll find him, Mrs. Peterson, and we'll get your medication back. As I closed the door behind her, a strange sense of calm washed over me. I had set the wheels in motion, and now all I could do was wait. Wait and see what would happen. Wait and pray that this would finally be the wake-up call Danny needed. The wedding was weeks away. I had planted the seed. Let's see how it grows. The weak winter sun filtered through my apartment window, casting long shadows across the worn rug. Detective Miller sat opposite me, his notebook open, pen poised. Mrs. Carter, he began, his voice gentle. I understand this is difficult, but if you could just walk me through what happened again. I nodded, my throat tight. It started when I noticed my medication was missing. I explained about the escalating doses, how I'd initially dismissed it as my own forgetfulness. I have a heart condition. Detective, this medication isn't optional. My hand trembled as I reached for the glass of water on the coffee table. He waited patiently, his gaze steady but kind. And when did you realize your son, Danny, was involved? He asked, his voice neutral. I closed my eyes for a moment. The image of Eleanor and Julian laughing at me. Your own son doesn't respect you. Julian had sneered, flashing behind my eyelids. I took a deep breath. Eleanor, my daughter, and her fiancé, Julian, they suspected something. Julian actually found empty pill bottles hidden in Danny's room. I paused, the words catching in my throat. I confronted Danny, and he admitted it. Did he say why he took the medication? Mrs. Carter, Detective Miller asked softly. I swallowed hard. He said he needed money. For drugs. The detective's pen scratched across the paper, the sound echoing in the quiet room. And did he say where he sold them? I shook my head, unable to meet his gaze. No, he wouldn't say. The truth was, I hadn't pushed him. I'd been too stunned, too heartbroken, to ask anything more. Did you notice anything else missing from your apartment, Mrs. Carter? Anything of value? He inquired, his eyes searching mine. I thought back, trying to recall the chaos of the past few days. Not that I can think of, I replied slowly. I haven't been myself. It's all been a bit of a blur. He nodded understandingly. We'll need you to sign this statement, Mrs. Carter, he said, sliding the notebook across the table. And if you remember anything else, no matter how small, please don't hesitate to call. I signed the statement, my hand still shaky, as Detective Miller rose to leave. He paused at the door. Mrs. Carter, he said, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place in his eyes. I know this isn't easy, but sometimes tough love is the only kind that works. Then he was gone, leaving me alone with the silence and the shadows. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window at the gray winter sky. Eleanor and Julian's cruelty still stung, their words echoing in my ears. They thought I was weak. They thought I was a fool. They thought I would let them push me on, dictate my life, treat me like I was nothing. They'd even suggested I move into a smaller apartment, something more manageable. As Eleanor had so delicately put it, Julian had chimed in, suggesting I could use the money from selling my place to help support Danny, completely disregarding the fact it was my security, my independence. They were wrong. I looked around my apartment, at the familiar furniture, the photographs on the walls, the books lining the shelves. This was my home, and I wouldn't be driven from it, not by Danny, and certainly not by Eleanor and Julian. A slow smile spread across my face. They had underestimated me. They had no idea what I was capable of. They had no idea about the investments I had made, the careful planning, the quiet accumulation of resources they were completely oblivious to. I stood up, a newfound strength coursing through me. I walked over to the small antique desk in the corner of the room and opened the bottom drawer. Inside, nestled amongst old letters and photographs, was a thick manila envelope. I pulled it out, my fingers tracing the embossed lettering on the front. Carter Family Trust. Eleanor and Julian had been so focused on my immediate struggles, so convinced of my vulnerability, that they hadn't even bothered to consider the bigger picture. They had no idea about the trust, established years ago by my late husband, designed specifically to protect me and ensure my financial security. They thought I was dependent on them. They thought I was desperate. They thought they held all the cards. How wrong they were. The trust provided me with a substantial monthly income, more than enough to cover my living expenses and any medical bills. It also contained a clause that allowed me, at my discretion, to distribute funds to my children, and right now, I had absolutely no intention of sharing a single penny with Eleanor. She and Julian could fend for themselves. I placed the envelope back in the drawer, a sense of calm washing over me. This wasn't just about the money. This was about regaining control. This was about showing them that I wasn't the weak, helpless woman they thought I was. I had been through a lot, but I was a survivor, and I would come out of this stronger than ever. The look on Eleanor and Julian's faces when they realized how wrong they had been, that would be my true reward. The holidays were coming up. It was time to start making some plans. The afternoon sun slanted through my apartment window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. It felt peaceful, a stark contrast to the turmoil that had ripped through my life these past few weeks. I ran my hand over the worn fabric of the armchair, Danny's favorite spot. He would sprawl here for hours, lost in music or video games, seemingly oblivious to the world around him, oblivious to the worry etched on my face, the sleepless nights I spent listening for his key in the lock, oblivious, or perhaps justionable to see, unable to see the damage his addiction was inflicting, not just on himself, but on everyone who loved him, especially me. The silence in the apartment was heavy, broken only by the gentle tick of the clock on the wall. It was a familiar silence now, one I had grown accustomed to during Danny's absences. But this time, it was different. This time, I knew he wouldn't be bursting through the door, his energy filling the room, his apologies tumbling out in a rush. This time, the silence held a weight of finality. I picked up a framed photograph from the side table. It was taken on Eleanor's graduation day. We were all so happy then. Danny, clean and sober for a few precious months, his arm around Eleanor, a genuine smile lighting up his face. Julian, standing proudly beside her, radiating that quiet confidence that had drawn Eleanor to him in the first place. "You look beautiful, Mom," Eleanor had said, squeezing my hand. "I couldn't have done it without you." Looking at the photo now, a fresh wave of grief washed over me. Would I ever see that smile on Danny's face again? Would I ever feel his arm around me, a comforting weight against my shoulder? The doctor's words echoed in my mind. "Mrs. Miller, you need to prioritize your health. This medication is crucial." Without it, he hadn't needed to finish the sentence. I knew what was at stake, my life, and I had finally chosen to protect it. Reporting Danny to the police had been the hardest decision I'd ever made. But deep down, I knew it was the only way to break the cycle of enabling, the only way to force him to confront the devastating consequences of his actions. The phone rang, startling me. It was Detective Reynolds. "Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice somber. "We've apprehended your son. He's currently in custody. I closed my eyes, a tear escaping and tracing a path down my cheek. Thank you, I whispered, my voice choked with emotion. Can I speak to him? There was a pause. I'm afraid not, ma'am. He's being processed. But you can visit him tomorrow. Tomorrow. The word hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Tomorrow, I would face my son, not as the enabler who had always bailed him out, but as the mother who had finally drawn a line in the sand. It would be the hardest conversation of my life, but it was a conversation we both needed to have. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, moving through the motions of making dinner, tidying the apartment. But my mind was elsewhere. I replayed every conversation I'd ever had with Danny, searching for missed opportunities, for signs I should have recognized, for a different path we could have taken. But the past couldn't be changed. All I could do now was focus on the future, a future where Danny, hopefully, would finally get the help he needed, a future where our relationship, fractured and strained, could begin to heal. The next morning, I dressed carefully, choosing a simple but elegant outfit. I needed to project strength, both for Danny and for myself. As I drove to the police station, my hands gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the frantic beating of my heart. This was it, the moment of truth. Seeing Danny behind the thick glass of the visiting room was a shock. He looked thinner, paler, his eyes shadowed with a weariness that went beyond physical exhaustion. He looked broken. "Mom," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm so sorry." The words, so often heard before, now carried a different weight. They were no longer empty apologies, uttered to appease and manipulate. They were the words of a son who finally understood the depth of his transgression. "Danny," I said, my voice trembling, "I love you, and I want to help you, but I can't do it anymore. Not like this." He nodded, tears streaming down his face. "I know, Mom, I know." And for the first time, I truly believed him. "Julian called," I said, changing the subject slightly. "He and Eleanor are worried about you. They want to help too." A flicker of surprise crossed Danny's face. "They do." He'd always kept his addiction hidden from Eleanor and Julian, ashamed of his weakness. "Yes," I said. "They know, and they still love you." The conversation was difficult, raw, and filled with tears, but it was also a turning point. Danny admitted he needed help. He agreed to enter a rehabilitation program, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a glimmer of hope. Later that week, I received a registered letter. It was from my late Aunt Mildred, a woman I barely knew. Inside was a copy of her will. She had left me her entire estate, a considerable sum of money, and a beautiful vacation home on the coast. I was stunned. It was a completely unexpected windfall, a gift, it seemed, from a universe that finally seemed to be smiling on me. I called Eleanor and Julian, sharing the news. "Mom, that's incredible," Eleanor exclaimed. "Think of what you can do. You can finally take that trip you've always dreamed of." Julian added, "And you can ensure Danny gets the best possible care." They were right. This unexpected inheritance would change everything. It would give me the financial security I needed to support Danny through his recovery, and it would give me the freedom to finally start living my own life again. A life free from the constant worry and fear that had consumed me for so long. The apartment felt lighter now, the silence no longer heavy with despair, but filled with the promise of a brighter future. A future I was finally ready to embrace.